Have you ever stopped to think about where religions come from, who created the first gods, and more? Could it be that the rituals that exist today were already done thousands of years ago? Ancient Mesopotamia was not only the cradle of civilization, but also of the first beliefs that shaped the world. There, the first temples were erected, the first priests emerged, and the gods began to rule the lives of humans. What happened in the secret rituals? Who controlled spiritual power? The truth is that without Mesopotamian religion, perhaps the beliefs we know today would not even exist. Today's myths may have been born back then, and the scariest thing, some of their rituals still take place, but in a way that no one imagines. If you like history, mystery, and want to understand how the first religions emerged, subscribe to the channel now, because what I'm going to reveal here can change your view of the past and the present. Now let's dive into the religion of ancient Mesopotamia and discover the secrets they left us. Before Mesopotamia became a powerhouse of cities and empires, its inhabitants were already looking up at the sky and wondering, who controls the world? The answer came in the form of the first gods. Unlike modern religions, where there is a single god or a well-defined hierarchy, Mesopotamians believed in deities who represented forces of nature and aspects of everyday life. The Sumerians, the oldest people in the region, created one of the first pantheons in history. At the top was An, the god of the sky, seen as the supreme authority. But curiously, he was not the most adored. Enlil, the god of wind and storms, had a more active role in the human world, being considered the one who controlled the destiny of men. Enki, the god of water and wisdom, was seen as the great protector of humanity. Mesopotamian deities were not perfect or distant. They had personalities, desires, and even made mistakes. Some could be generous, while others were vindictive. This made religion extremely human and close to everyday life. The gods could bestow blessings, but also severe punishments. As time passed, each city began to adopt a main god. Nippur worshipped Enlil, Uruk was the city of Inanna, the goddess of love and war, and Eridu worshipped Enki. This relationship between city and deity meant that Mesopotamian religion was decentralized, without a single center of power. The influence of these gods spread to other civilizations. Many scholars believe that the pantheons of later civilizations, such as the Egyptians and Greeks, were inspired by the Mesopotamian model. The concept of a creator god of heaven and earth, as well as a divine hierarchy, may have come directly from these early beliefs. The myths that arose in this period explained everything that the Mesopotamians did not understand. Why does it rain? Why do rivers flood? Why do crops fail? Everything was attributed to the will of the gods. But in order for these gods to continue to favor humans, it was necessary to worship them correctly. Thus, the first temples and priests were born. The first temples in history appeared in Mesopotamia. Unlike today's churches or mosques, these temples were not just places of worship, but true centers of power. They were called ziggurats, huge pyramid-shaped constructions that served as the abode of the gods on earth. The priests were the intermediaries between the human and the divine worlds, and their influence was immense. The temple was not just a place for prayers, it was the economic and political center of the cities. The priests managed land, controlled grain warehouses, and made decisions that affected the entire population. In many cases, their power rivaled that of kings. This was because religion was the basis of Mesopotamian society. If one wanted prosperity, one had to make sure that the gods were satisfied. Inside the temples, priests performed daily rituals. They fed the statues of the gods, offered sacrifices, and interpreted divine signs. The cult was extremely strict. Any mistake in a ritual could be seen as an omen of disaster. The priests were also responsible for predicting the future. They interpreted dreams, observed the movement of the stars, and analyzed the livers of sacrificed animals to seek messages from the gods. This custom, called haruspicina, was taken so seriously that no major decision was made without consulting the priests. If a king wanted to start a war, he first needed to know if the gods approved. Another curious aspect of Mesopotamian religion was the presence of priestesses. Unlike many later civilizations where the priesthood was exclusively male, women played an active role in cults. Some priestesses were extremely influential, such as Enheduanna, daughter of King Sargon of Akkad, who became the first female writer in history. She composed hymns dedicated to the goddess Inanna, cementing her position in both religion and culture. Over time, religion began to mix even more with politics. Many kings began to declare themselves chosen by the gods, and temples became essential allies to maintain power. The link between faith and government was one of the most striking features of Mesopotamia, influencing civilizations that came later. Each civilization tries to explain where the world came from and how humans came to be. In Mesopotamia, this explanation was in the creation myths, sacred stories that showed how the gods shaped everything that exists. The most famous of these myths is the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian epic of creation, which describes a cosmic battle between primordial gods and the emergence of order in the universe. In the beginning, there were only two forces: Apsu, the god of fresh waters, and Tiamat, the goddess of the salty oceans. Together, they gave rise to several lesser deities, but these new generations brought chaos and disruption. Apsu, angered by the noise of his children, planned to destroy them. Before he could, he was killed by Ea, or Enki, the god of wisdom. Tiamat, furious at Apsu's death, decided to take revenge. He created an army of monsters and declared war on the younger gods. It was then that Marduk, one of the most powerful gods, entered the battle. He faced Tiamat, defeated her, and with his body created the world. Heaven came from the upper part of the goddess's body, while earth came from the lower part. But creation was not complete. To maintain order, Marduk decided to create humans. According to the myth, he sacrificed Kingu, one of Tiamat's allies, and used his blood to shape humanity. The purpose of humans: serving the gods, taking care of the temples, and ensuring that rituals were fulfilled. This myth was not just a symbolic explanation of the world. It reflected the social structure of Mesopotamia. Just as Marduk mastered chaos and established order, kings were also supposed to maintain stability in their cities. The role of humans as servants of the gods justified the hard work and tribute paid to the temples. Other Mesopotamian myths also explored creation, each with variations depending on the city and period. But the central theme was always the same. The world was born out of the conflict between divine forces, and humans were made to ensure that this order was maintained. This concept influenced several other religions. The idea that man was created from the blood of a divine entity may have served as inspiration for later beliefs, including biblical accounts of creation. In addition, the notion that the world was made from the body of a primordial being also appears in Norse mythology, where the giant Ymir has a fate similar to that of Tiamat. These myths were more than just stories. They formed the basis of Mesopotamia's religious identity, guiding the rituals and beliefs of the people. But what happened after death? For the Mesopotamians, the afterlife was a dark and inevitable place. Unlike many religions that promise a paradise or glorious eternal life, the Mesopotamians had a bleak view of what happened after death. For them, the afterlife was not a place of happiness, but an inevitable and melancholic destiny. Called Kur, or Irkalla, the underworld was ruled by Ereshkigal, the queen of the dead. Those who died descended into this subterranean world, where they lived as a shadow, without joy, without light, and without hope. There was no moral judgment. No matter if someone was good or bad in life, they all had the same fate, a dull existence, feeding on dust and dirty water. The only relief for the dead came from the offerings made by the living. If a family member left food or drink on the graves, the spirit could feel some comfort. But if a dead person was forgotten, his soul became a wandering ghost, haunting the living. This view of the afterlife may seem frightening, but it was part of a very practical thinking of the Mesopotamians. For them, life was fleeting and full of difficulties. The focus was on enjoying the present and ensuring the protection of the gods while they were alive. This concept appears in several narratives, such as in the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest stories in the world. At the end of the tale, Gilgamesh, a king who seeks immortality, discovers that death is inevitable and that the only way to be remembered is through his actions and achievements in life. Interestingly, this idea is reflected in other ancient cultures. The Greeks had Hades, a similar underworld where most souls wandered aimlessly. The ancient Hebrews also had a similar view in the concept of Sheol, a dark place for the dead. Despite this bleak outlook, the Mesopotamians still sought ways to protect themselves in the afterlife. Funeral rituals were extremely important, and families invested time and resources to ensure that their dead were welcomed into the underworld. Thus, Mesopotamian religion not only dictated how people lived, but also influenced how they viewed death. The fear of oblivion was real, and the only way to avoid a fate worse than death itself was to be remembered by the living. In ancient Mesopotamia, rituals and festivals were not just religious events, but essential moments to maintain harmony between the gods and humans. Each celebration had a purpose: to ensure good harvests, protect the city from disaster, or simply honor the gods and ask for blessings. These ceremonies were so important that they involved the whole of society, from kings to the simplest peasants. The largest and most famous festival in Mesopotamia was Akitu, celebrated annually in Babylon. It marked the new year and lasted 12 days, involving processions, purification rituals, and even dramatizations of religious myths. During this festivity, the statue of the god Marduk was carried in a great procession through the streets of the city, while the priests performed rites to renew the king's power. One of the most dramatic moments was when the ruler underwent a symbolic ritual in which he was humiliated and beaten by the priests before being officially reaffirmed as the chosen one of the gods. In addition to Akitu, there were daily rituals in the temples. The most important of these was the feeding of the gods. Unlike modern religions, where believers only pray and make symbolic offerings, Mesopotamians believed that the gods needed to be physically fed. To do this, priests prepared elaborate meals and offered them to the divine statues inside the temples. After a while, the food was taken away and considered consumed spiritually by the gods. Another common ritual involved exorcisms and purification. The Mesopotamians believed that disease, bad luck, and tragedy were caused by evil spirits or the wrath of the gods. To ward off these negative forces, priests performed purification rituals with fire, water, and incantations. Some of these rituals were recorded on clay tablets and served as the basis for similar practices in other ancient cultures. Festivals and rituals were not only religious, but also social and political events. They reinforced the power of priests and kings, as well as uniting the population around a common identity. To this day, many of these practices have left traces in modern religions and traditions, but not everything in Mesopotamian rituals was celebration. When the gods were dissatisfied, they could cast terrible curses on humans. In ancient Mesopotamia, the gods were not always kind. They could be generous and bring plenty, but also vindictive and merciless when they felt disrespected. Divine curses were feared and taken extremely seriously, as it was believed that they could destroy entire cities, ruin families, and condemn individuals to terrible fates. One of the most common forms of curse was the divine plague. The Mesopotamians believed that diseases and epidemics were not just natural phenomena, but direct punishments from the gods. If a city disobeyed divine laws or neglected sacred rituals, it could be punished with devastating pestilences. Many of these beliefs were recorded on clay tablets, where scribes described outbreaks of illness attributed to the wrath of the gods. Another feared curse was drought and famine. Because the Mesopotamian economy depended on agriculture, any crop failures were seen as a sign that the gods were dissatisfied. Priests performed rituals to try to calm divine wrath, offering sacrifices and prayers. If nothing worked, the population believed they were doomed to starve to death or suffer for years until the gods were appeased. In addition to the curses that affected entire cities, there were also those directed at individuals. Mesopotamian texts mention instances of kings, priests, and ordinary citizens who were cursed for disobeying the gods. Some were condemned to exile, others suffered from mysterious illnesses, and some simply disappeared without a trace. One of the most famous examples of divine curse was the fate of the city of Akkad. According to records of the time, the powerful Akkadian civilization was destroyed because its king, Naram-Sin, enraged the gods by attacking a temple. As punishment, the gods sent droughts, invasions by enemies, and the complete destruction of the empire. This event served as a lesson for future civilizations, which began to fear divine wrath even more. The belief in curses was so strong that many people took precautions to protect themselves. Amulets, incantations, and purification rituals were used to ward off the negative influence of the angry gods. Some even tried to transfer the curse to someone else in a ritual called ritual substitution, where an object or an animal symbolically received the punishment in place of the real culprit. These beliefs in divine punishments shaped the way Mesopotamians lived, always trying to stay in harmony with the gods. But the effects of this religion were not restricted to Mesopotamia. Some of his ideas even influenced the Bible and other later religious traditions. Many people don't know, but several stories and concepts present in the Bible have striking parallels with the myths and beliefs of ancient Mesopotamia. This does not mean that one text copied the other, but rather that nearby civilizations shared ideas, and some of them were absorbed into later traditions. One of the most well-known examples is the account of the flood. In the Bible, the story of Noah tells that God decided to destroy humanity with a great flood, sparing only Noah, his family, and the animals he placed on the ark. But long before this account, the Mesopotamians already had a similar version in the Epic of Gilgamesh. In this myth, the gods decided to exterminate humanity with a flood, but the god Enki warned a man named Utnapishtim to build a large boat and save his family and animals. The flood lasted for several days, until the ark stopped at the top of a mountain. The parallel with the story of Noah is evident, and many scholars believe that the biblical account may have been influenced by this older myth. Another Mesopotamian concept present in the Bible is the creation of man. As already mentioned, in the myth of the Enuma Elish, Marduk created humanity from the blood of a divine being so that humans would serve the gods. In the Bible, God fashions the first man from clay and breathes life into his nostrils, a concept similar to that found in Sumerian texts about the creation of man. The Tower of Babel also has Mesopotamian roots. Biblical history says that humans tried to build a tower so high that it would reach the heavens, but God confused their tongues to stop them. This closely resembles the ziggurats, huge pyramid-shaped temples built in Mesopotamia. The ziggurat of Babylon, called Etemenanki, was described as a bridge between heaven and earth. It is possible that the Tower of Babel account was inspired by these temples. In addition to these examples, there are influences on the idea of a divine judgment, the belief in angels and demons, and even the concept of a paradise lost, something that is very reminiscent of the Mesopotamian idea of a mythical time where the gods lived with men before the fall of humanity. This does not mean that the Bible is just a copy of Mesopotamian mythology, but rather that these texts are part of the same cultural context. Mesopotamian stories and beliefs have been passed down through the centuries, influencing diverse religions and traditions. Mesopotamian kings, for example, considered themselves chosen by the gods, something that also happened with Hebrew and Egyptian kings. This relationship between power and religion was fundamental to the organization of society. In Mesopotamia, being king was not just about ruling a city or empire. The monarch was seen as an intermediary between gods and men, someone who ruled with divine authority. Their mission was to ensure that the order established by the gods was maintained by protecting the city from enemies and ensuring that religious rituals were performed correctly. Unlike the pharaohs of Egypt, who were considered deities in life, the Mesopotamian kings were not gods, but chosen by them. Their power came directly from the deities, and any failure in their rule could be seen as a sign that the gods were dissatisfied. This meant that a king who faced military defeats, famine, or natural disasters could be questioned and even replaced. The most famous example of this concept was Hammurabi, king of Babylon, who created one of the first law codes in history. He claimed that his laws were given by the god Shamash, the god of the sun and justice. This not only reinforced their power, but also made the laws sacred and unquestionable. Another interesting aspect is that, during festivals such as Akitu, the king had to undergo rituals of humiliation to prove his loyalty to the gods. If he failed the ritual, or if the divine signs were not favorable, his rule could be threatened. In addition, kings often associated with deities to justify their conquests. King Sargon of Akkad, for example, claimed to be protected by the goddess Inanna, while Nebuchadnezzar, the Saint of Babylon, dedicated great works to Marduk to demonstrate his devotion. This relationship between religion and power did not end with the end of Mesopotamia. The idea that kings rule by divine right continued in several civilizations, including European empires and even modern monarchies that still refer to a sacred power. But in addition to concern for the present, Mesopotamians were also afraid of the future. They believed that the gods could reveal the fate of men through signs, and divination became an essential practice for making important decisions. The Mesopotamians believed that the world was sustained by the will of the gods, but this order was fragile. If the gods were dissatisfied, they could destroy everything in a catastrophic event. This idea spawned one of the deepest beliefs of Mesopotamian civilization, the fear of apocalypse. Unlike modern religions, which speak of an end of the world, often linked to divine judgment, the Mesopotamians saw the apocalypse as a collapse of the cosmic order. If the gods withdrew their favor, the world would return to the original chaos. This fear was so strong that kings and priests were always concerned with interpreting signs and omens to avoid divine wrath. The Mesopotamian flood, narrated in the Epic of Gilgamesh, already showed that the gods were capable of exterminating all humanity. For the Babylonians and Sumerians, this story was not just a legend, but a reminder that the gods could repeat this punishment at any time. They believed that there was a cycle of creation and destruction where entire civilizations could be erased if they did not follow divine commandments. Many clay tablets left by the priests tell of signs of impending destruction. An eclipse, an unusual storm, or an earthquake were interpreted as warnings that the apocalypse was near. In times of crisis, kings sought to calm the gods with sacrifices and rituals. Sometimes a substitute king was chosen to take the throne temporarily, in the hope that if a chastisement was sent, he would fall on the false king instead of the true ruler. This fear of the end of the world influenced later civilizations. The concept of a destruction caused by divine wrath appears in various traditions, from the biblical apocalypse to Norse myths such as Ragnarok. The idea that the world can end because of human behavior also has echoes in the modern view of environmental catastrophes and social collapses. But before the world came to an end, many Mesopotamians feared something else, the invisible entities that lurked in the darkness and tormented the living. In Mesopotamia, the world was full of unseen forces. In addition to the gods, there were demons and spirits, powerful beings that could help or torment humans. These beings were not like the demons of modern religions, but rather entities that existed between the worlds of the living and the dead, with personalities of their own. Some demons were messengers of the gods, responsible for bringing diseases and divine punishments. Others were souls of the dead, who did not receive proper rituals and wandered the world haunting the living. There were also entities that simply enjoyed causing terror for no apparent reason. One of the most feared was Pazuzu, a demonic spirit associated with wind and plagues. He was portrayed as a hybrid creature, with a human body, wings, claws, and a monstrous face. Interestingly, despite being scary, Pazuzu was also invoked to ward off other evil spirits, especially to protect pregnant women and children. Another feared being was Lamashtu, a demon that preyed on pregnant women and newborns. She was held responsible for unexplained infant deaths and was depicted with claws, sharp teeth, and lion's feet. To protect themselves from her, the mothers wore amulets with the image of Pazuzu, since he was one of the few beings capable of facing her. The Mesopotamians believed that demons could enter the human body and cause disease or madness. To expel them, priests performed exorcism rituals, burning sacred herbs, reciting incantations, and even using magical statues to attract the evil spirit and trap it. The dead could also return as vengeful ghosts. If someone was not given a proper burial or was forgotten by the living, their soul could become a wandering spirit, tormenting their family and bringing bad luck. To prevent this, the Mesopotamians made periodic offerings to ancestors and asked the priests to purify any house that appeared haunted. This belief in evil spirits influenced many later traditions. Elements of Mesopotamian demons appear in Jewish, Christian, and Islamic texts, and to this day stories of demonic hauntings and possession bear traces of these ancient beliefs. The Mesopotamians not only feared demons, but also tried to understand the future through divination, an essential practice in the society of the time. In ancient Mesopotamia, no one made major decisions without first consulting the gods. Kings, priests, and even ordinary people resorted to divination to understand the future and avoid disasters. The gods were believed to send signals about the fate of the world, and interpreting these signals correctly was essential to ensure prosperity. Divination methods were varied and extremely sophisticated for the time. One of the most common was the reading of the livers of animals. Priests sacrificed a sheep and examined its liver, believing that the gods left hidden messages in the organ's marks and texture. The liver was seen as a reflection of the universe, and any abnormality could indicate good or bad luck. This method was so important that tablets were found with models of clay livers used for the training of priests. Another popular technique was stargazing. The Mesopotamians were pioneers in astronomy, and much of their knowledge served as the basis for the horoscopes we know today. They believed that the movement of the planets and stars influenced events on Earth. If Mars were in a certain position, it could mean war. If Jupiter shone brighter, it would bring blessings and wealth. This practice became so accurate that the Babylonians were able to predict eclipses with great accuracy. Priests also interpreted dreams as direct messages from the gods. If a king dreamed of a lion, for example, it could mean an enemy attack. If an ordinary person dreamed of clean water, they could expect good news. There were veritable manuals for dream interpretation recorded on clay tablets, showing how seriously this practice was taken. In addition, there were prophets who claimed to receive direct messages from the gods. Some of these prophets worked inside the temples, while others were ordinary individuals who went into a trance and proclaimed revelations. Kings often consulted with these prophets before going to war or making political decisions. Belief in divination was not superstition for the Mesopotamians, but a sacred science that guided their lives. This desire to predict the future influenced later civilizations, including the Greeks and Romans, and to this day practices such as astrology and dream interpretation carry traces of this ancient tradition. But for all the importance of Mesopotamian religion, it would not last forever. As the centuries passed, new beliefs and empires emerged, and the old faith began to fade. The Mesopotamian religion was one of the most enduring in history, existing for thousands of years. But like any great tradition, it had its end. The decline did not happen all at once, but over centuries, as new empires and faiths began to dominate the region. One of the first blows came with the Persians, who conquered Babylon in 539 BC. The Persians followed Zoroastrianism, a monotheistic religion that believed in a supreme god named Ahura Mazda. Unlike the Mesopotamians, who worshipped several gods in physical temples, the Persians began to change this tradition, reducing the influence of the ancient priests. But the real collapse came with the arrival of Christianity and Islam. In the 1st century AD, Christianity began to spread throughout the Middle East, and over time, Mesopotamian temples were abandoned or destroyed. By the 7th century, Islam had become the dominant religion in the region, and any vestige of the ancient faith had almost completely disappeared. The last temples dedicated to the Mesopotamian gods were closed around the 3rd or 4th century AD. Knowledge of rituals and myths began to be lost, and cuneiform writing, used to record sacred texts, was forgotten. For more than 1,000 years, the Mesopotamian civilization fell by the wayside until modern archaeologists rediscovered its ruins in the 19th century. Although Mesopotamian religion disappeared, its influence was never fully erased. Many of his ideas were absorbed by other faiths, and his myths still resonate in religious and cultural texts to this day. But has any of this ancient faith survived in the modern world? The religion of ancient Mesopotamia may have disappeared centuries ago, but its influences are still everywhere. Many traditions, beliefs, and even words we use today have roots in the ancient religious practices of that civilization. One of the clearest legacies is in astrology. The Babylonians were the first to divide the sky into 12 parts, creating the concept of zodiacal signs. The belief that the stars influence people's personalities and destiny comes directly from the Mesopotamian priests, who interpreted the movement of the planets as messages from the gods. Even today, millions of people around the world consult horoscopes, unaware that this tradition began more than 4,000 years ago. Another aspect that survived was the idea of a great flood, present in the Bible and other religious traditions. The Epic of Gilgamesh already told the story of a man saved from a devastating flood by order of the gods, a myth that may have inspired the Old Testament account of Noah. This theme also appears in legends from other cultures, showing how Mesopotamian influence spread throughout the world. Many religious words and concepts also originate in Mesopotamia. The name Babylon, for example, appears in the Bible as a symbol of sin and decay. a reference to the city that was once the spiritual center of the ancient world. Terms like Eden, from the biblical paradise, can be linked to the Sumerian word Eden, which meant plain. Even the idea of angels and demons has parallels with the lesser spirits and deities of Mesopotamia. Religious architecture also carries influences from this distant past. Ziggurats, huge temples in the shape of a stepped pyramid, served as models for sacred structures in various cultures. The Tower of Babel, described in the Bible, may have been inspired by the Etemenanki, a royal ziggurat that existed in Babylon. In addition, the practice of sacrifices, offerings, and purification rituals can be seen in various religions that emerged later. Many of these traditions have echoes of ancient Mesopotamian ceremonies, where priests performed rituals to please the gods and ward off evil. Finally, the very idea of a government legitimized by religion comes from Mesopotamia. Mesopotamian kings ruled as representatives of the gods, a concept that was adopted by later empires and still exists in some modern monarchies. Even though the Mesopotamian gods have been forgotten, their stories, symbols, and teachings live on in ways that few people realize. The old faith may have disappeared, but its influence has never ceased to exist.